When you take a look on Magento code for the first time, you might be surprised with its structure. In a typical MVC framework such as CodeIgniter, all models will be in one folder, all controllers in another, and all views will be also grouped into views folder. But that's not the case with Magento. Its code is grouped together into modules, and each module acts as a container for some specific functionality. Here we have a list of all core modules that come with default installation, and I'll take a random one, let's say Customer, to show you how modules are generally organized in Magento. Beside typical model and controllers, we can also notice some new components like block, etc, helper, and SQL. In the previous lesson, we mentioned that Magento is a configuration-based framework, meaning that you need to configure pretty much everything in order to use it. For example, if you want to use a model in your module, you'll need to add a node to config.xml in module's etc folder that tells Magento you want to use models. The same thing will be for blocks, helpers, routers, data resources, and many other things. All of them need to be configured in config.xml file, and we'll see how to do that in the next lesson. For now, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what happens on every page request, and I'm assuming that the caching is disabled, otherwise the system will skip a lot of stuff and send a response from the cache. First, Magento reads all config.xml files inside of active modules and merge them into one very big XML configuration tree during app initialization. Once initialized, Magento will inspect the requested URL and try to find the module which will be responsible for that particular request. And how does it find it? Well, it will read from that big configuration tree, which, among other things, has routers nodes. A router node basically tells the system what request each module should be responsible for. The customer module, for example, is configured to be responsible for all requests that begin with customer after site URL. CMS module will handle all requests starting with CMS, and so on. If the responsible module for a particular request is found in that big configuration tree, Magento will go to the module's controllers folder, instantiate the right one, and invoke the action method in that controller. You might be wondering now how the system knows what's the right controller and action method for a request, and the answer is simple. It will read from URL. It's an interesting subject which we'll cover in depth in the routing section, so don't worry about that now. Remember, this is just an overview. Now, assuming that Magento successfully finished the routing process, which means it recognized the responsible module, its controller, and the action method inside of that controller, it's interesting what happens in that action method. Unlike other MVC frameworks where a controller action is responsible for getting some data from the model and pass it to corresponding view, in Magento, controller actions optionally talk to models, but their primary role is to load and render the views, without passing any data to them. This is the part where newcomers get lost, and I must admit that's a very tricky part, but once you get familiar, it becomes very cool. And what's even more confusing, Magento views have been separated into blocks, layouts, and templates. Blocks are PHP classes which can be found in modules directory, while templates are stored in design area as PHTML files, containing a mix of HTML and PHP. Each block is tied to a single template file by the third view component called layout. Layouts are plain XML files sitting in layouts folder in the design area, waiting for responsible controller to load the ones that need to be loaded for a particular request. We won't cover now how the system decides what should be loaded per request. Just imagine for now that, as a result of this process, the system will instantiate necessary blocks found in layout, connect them to templates, and because of this connection, templates can ask their blocks for data by calling block methods, and finally embed returned results in HTML. And once all templates are rendered, you see the page in your browser. I totally understand if nothing is clear to you, and believe me, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how this all works, and most other people do. Just keep watching the course, and I promise everything will be much clearer to you as the time goes. So, when you come back to this lesson after watching the whole course, it will be much clearer to you what I was talking about.